All right, we're on with Demetre. Demetre graduated from Miami of Ohio back in 2022, and he's here with us today. Demetre, great to have you on the program.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's just jump into a little bit of background on you. So tell us, where'd you grow up? Why'd you go to Miami of Ohio? And what was your career goal when you first got started in undergrad?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I grew up on the East Coast in Connecticut, center of Connecticut, and I had what I consider to be more of an interesting path to Miami of Ohio. I grew up a golf caddy, which I think kind of had some influences ultimately when it comes to my interest in finance. But
Great
I
job
spent
for aspiring bankers.
Yeah, yeah. I met some pretty interesting folks on the course, which ultimately kind of sparked the interest in the finance industry. But yeah, I spent a couple summers out on Nantucket caddying at this course, and through that, there's a scholarship out of Evanston, Illinois, actually, the Evans Scholarship, which is applicable to a handful of Midwestern Big Ten schools, but ultimately, I kind of set my target on Miami. It was a mix of that, and also just the business school there was phenomenal. So. Um, I think the caddying and the college decision all kind of go hand in hand with, ultimately how I decided to pursue a career in finance. I was fortunate to rub elbows with some pretty, successful folks from, the New York and East Coast surrounding areas, out on the golf
Yeah.
course, and
Can we pause on
those,
that for a second? So, like, what
yeah.
was some of the advice that you got, as a caddy, spending time with those folks that you might not have gotten otherwise?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, obviously looking back 7, 8, 9 years now, the specifics get a little blurry, but I think overall, the interesting part was to quite literally see folks conducting golf, on the golf course. And on top of that, there was a handful of, some pretty interesting people out there who kind of acted as mentors. So, fortunately, there was a guy by the name of Jack Welch who used to run GE,
Yeah.
who was a member at that course and actually did a pretty interesting college preparatory session with the caddies on, kind of off the course, but you got that exposure to him. And, it was folks like himself, as well as, some bankers and private equity professionals from the New York area who would spend their summers out that way, who ultimately, come time for, college and recruiting, we're nice enough to invite me down to the city to visit, Deutsche Bank and Carl Weinberg, which was a pretty cool experience and one that I, probably wouldn't have gotten doing another summer job. Um, so I think, the time spent on the golf course with those folks and honestly just kind of overhearing their conversations and
Hmm.
what they were talking about, what they were interested in, how their how their kind of world and jobs worked. Just kind of got me bought in early on.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, those early exposures certainly are huge. Not that you have to be a caddy to be successful in banking. That's not a
No,
requirement. But
no.
the point is, like, it's really a form of like advanced network, not like early networking, right? It's kind of like that you're gonna getting paid to, and you get to sort of sit in some of these rooms, if you will, or in the vicinity of folks talking about these key concepts.
Yeah, and I mean, you take it one step further. I think it's when you think about recruiting, right, for investment banking and private equity and whatever kind of finance industry you want to get into, it's pretty pivotal in terms of just developing the soft skills that
Yeah.
ultimately will help you succeed in those interviews. So, if anyone's young enough to become a golf caddy, this this might be my plug. But no, in short, that's kind of how I found my interest in the world of finance, just through the golf course.
That's great. And so when you first got to Miami of Ohio, kind of what were you thinking? What was your sort of specific career goal at that time, and how did that change, if it changed?
Yeah, it's I think broadly speaking, for me, finance had always been, broad finance is a broad umbrella, but had always kind of been the interest for me. But it started off more kind of on like the wealth management RIA side of the house, individual high net worth clients. I had a misconception when I entered college that that was like stock picking. Obviously, that is far more like, a portfolio or ETFs, mutual funds, etc., which I didn't appreciate at the time. But I was fortunate during my sophomore, or excuse me, freshman summer. I went back to Connecticut and took an internship with a $3 billion RIA firm, 30 minutes or so away from home. And admittedly, I enjoyed the internship a great deal. It was incredible to get an internship as a freshman in general. So all good things, but uh, I was let down in a way because I thought it would be a little bit more analytical, and I think I had almost mistaken like the hedge fund world a little bit for like the asset or high net worth individual management world. So I kind of quickly pivoted after that summer, albeit a great experience. Not one that I thought I'd pursue longer term. And then sophomore year, when I got back to campus, is kind of when I took the jump towards investment banking. There's a fantastic organization in Miami of Ohio where I did my undergraduate degree, the Investment Banking Club, and so I got involved with those folks. It's primarily a student-run organization by, the kids who lead it are junior seniors who have either gotten their investment banking offers or their full-time offers, internship or full-time offers, and it's basically in short, a mentorship, organization. But that was kind of where I started to really, get the bug for, pursuing something in banking.
Yep. No, that makes sense. So it does seem like your ideas, like you said, you knew finance, but you didn't know how broad finance was when you first got
Yeah,
into it, right?
I,
So
s-
you
yeah.
there's like several decisions actually that have to be made before you land on investment banking from just like general interest in finance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think after freshman summer, I kind of think I went back into like, career exploration mode a bit. Because what I, thought was going to be, what I ultimately pursued, I kind of had second thoughts about, not in a bad way, just in I thought different, not bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when I just kind of started. Like I looked into consulting for a little bit for some time, and I know private equity is not as applicable right out of undergraduate studies. So I thought banking would be another interesting career to check out. So it's kind of how I got involved with the banking club and stuff.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, like you said, it's not you're not if as a great lawyer once said, if it doesn't fit, you must have quit, right? So if it's not a fit for you, that's okay. You move on. There's too many opportunities out there to spend time. And
Yeah,
and well done on getting an internship though. That was an internship after your freshman year in a
yeah,
world that you thought you wanted to get into. Like how just imagine where you would be if you hadn't done that internship and you thought that that was your path and you did it after school. Like you'd have a
yeah,
complete, you'd be in a much worse. I'd imagine you'd be in a worse spot right now because it would have taken you
yeah,
7 years to figure out that you didn't like it instead of 3 months.
yeah. No, I don't want to say like all early roads of my life lead back to like golf or caddying, but admittedly, like a lot of them do, and that's just a part of my identity. But I again was really fortunate. I caddied back home in the Connecticut area for my spring and fall time, and then I'd spend the summers out at another course. But I was really fortunate to get on the bag of a gentleman who worked at this firm that I ultimately went and spent my freshman summer at, and we took a liking to each other. And then I mean, that didn't get me the job; it got me an interview, which is
Yeah,
the first step, right? But yeah, that was a really fortunate, maybe a touch lucky opportunity that I came by early on in school. And yeah, I'm
yeah.
definitely looking back and I still keep up with some of those folks. So it's not all for nothing.
Absolutely. Well, that's all how important the network is. But like you said, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And yeah, I mean, you got to meet people. Maybe they give you a shot, but at the end of the day, you're not getting a handout. Like you're getting an
Yeah,
opportunity to compete. Is really what you're getting, right? You just want to
e-
give me a shot to compete on a level playing field and see where it goes.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So you did a really great job throughout your undergraduate time frame of securing those summer internships. A lot of folks are not getting a high quality corporate or finance oriented freshman, after as a rising sophomore. But tell us a little bit about that. So then you went and did You were at Copley Equity Partners, and then at MBF Healthcare Partners, and then at William Blair for the ultimate
Yeah.
junior year internship. So you did a great job securing internships that really seemed to set you up for success.
Yeah, I definitely kept busy. My freshman, sophomore, and early part of my junior year at school. I think, yeah, I'll touch on the internships themselves in a second, but I think what comes before the internships is a large deal of um, you know resume prep, cover letter prep, obviously applying, but then, there's kind of the second tier behind all your finance classes of things that I view as equally as important. And so obviously having the, stamp of approval that you study finance at school is important, but behind it there was, the case competitions, whether that
Hmm.
was the Harvard Global Case Comp or the William Blair Investment Banking Case Comp or Cleveland Research Company did one at our school. All of those where you had tangible work product to ultimately that's how I actually got one of mine, which I'll get to this story in a little bit.
Yeah.
But being able to produce tangible work product that's a PowerPoint presentation and a model that's allows you the ability to demonstrate, your technical capacity at a young age before you really have anything to actually show an employer, I think goes, a lot farther than, someone as a sophomore may realize. So it was the case competitions. It was, the financial modeling course that I took with Adventus. That was a large portion of what actually enabled me to go be successful in these case competitions and ultimately kind of lend itself nicely to all the technical preparation that you needed to do for more so the investment banking summer internship. Not as much when I was a sophomore in college. I think private equity firms appreciated that I maybe wasn't the most technically savvy, and they'd have me, disperse my workload into both qualitative and quantitative things. But it definitely really, helped itself when you think about the 500 question guide for junior summer investment banking. Like when you've been in the model and you've taken the course with Adventus, you obviously, have the luxury of having done versus, kind of theorizing about. And so that's one thing that was also super helpful. And the third thing, and I think everyone who ultimately tries to pursue a career in private equity or banking knows the importance of like the networking and the mentorship that is both helpful but needed in terms of getting even just first round interviews, coffee chats, or looks in general from these firms. But I had a really solid slate of probably five or six folks at Miami of Ohio who both stuck their neck out for me, at different banks that they worked at, or, when they were seniors coming back to that bank, were really instrumental to my, kind of recruiting process on campus and we're happy to pick up the phone at any time. Yeah, obviously, as well as just completing, a plethora of these networking calls to, investment banking analysts, associates, VPs. If you were fortunate enough to get someone a little bit more senior on the phone via, an alumni connection or some organization, then, you obviously ran at it. But those are kind of like the three pillars of what I view, my success being attributed to in in my recruiting processes, specifically as it relates to, the sophomore summer stuff, which I've talked to a lot of folks about sophomore summer. Both when
Yeah.
I, was just past it in college and also, folks who, when I was, my first 2 years at William Blair, I had a lot of Miami of Ohio folks reaching out for advice or networking calls. And I mean, some of them started as young as freshman year and I applauded them for it. It's really never too early to get started, but all that to be said, you know, taking taking the calls is like step one of you're probably going to take hundreds of them, but just taking the first one and getting on the phone with someone and, just understanding how, that conversation goes, how the finance world speaks. Like there's all these acronyms and
Yeah.
it's like very overwhelming at first, but once you just take the first one, it's easy to kind of get used to them and make a connection with people. Um, Specifically, though, sophomore summer, it, I the strategy I employed was there's there's this LinkedIn like add-on or LinkedIn special platform you can buy called LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and I won't bore you with all the search queries that you need to put into it, but you can
Yeah.
get like really granular on folks who went to Miami of Ohio and work in private equity with employees of less than 10. And so my strategy was I found basically every like sub 15 or sub 20 person private equity firm that had a Miami of Ohio or Evan Scholars connection at it and called every single one of them and emailed every single one of them at least 3 times. And that turned out to be probably about 120 contacts. I got about 85 or 90 of them on the phone because I think
Wow.
there's yeah, it was an intense one, but I think especially the Evans Scholarship for me, and it doesn't have to be a scholarship or it doesn't have to be, some very small organization. Like you could be in a, fraternity or a business fraternity, and the chances, regardless of your school, that someone's going to pick up the phone if there's some level of connectivity is
Yeah.
pretty high. But
Yeah, you've got to have some core level point of connection. Now, it can be a little more general. Like the most general will be, we both share a passion for M&A. Like there we go.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
tighter connection you can get is always better. And I like with it when you combine the Evans Scholar and the Miami of Ohio. What I love what you did is you were specific.
yeah,
That level of specificity, a lot of people are scared of it because they think that that removes options. Think about all the people that you ruled out. There's thousands of people
yeah,
you could have talked to, but no, it was your focus that actually won the day because now you have this list of 120 people. You called them every single one, emailed every single one 3 times, and
yeah,
you had 80 conversations out of it. That's thank you for sharing that example because that's something that we really try to drive home here that the average freshman doesn't understand when they're just getting started. They think networking, they've heard about it a bunch of times and they think, oh yeah, 10 people, 20 people, you're good to go. But no,
no,
it's take whatever number you think that it is and probably multiply it times 10.
yeah,
And like you said, and that was just your sophomore year internship,
yeah. That's not even,
just
yeah,
sophomore year internship, you're talking to 80 people. When you do something like that, when you have a clear strategy, um, if you want to upgrade to sales navigator, that's your call. We haven't talked too much about that, but that is an interesting technique. But when you take that combined with the under 15 people, and you probably did this on purpose, but one of the really wise things about doing that is that the decision making is not with some far off headquarters of HR people in some other building. It's with the person you're talking to. They probably
yeah,
have the authority to bring on an intern or not, and most of their concern is the cost of finding the intern and the cost of dealing with the intern is the major things they're concerned about. So if you're reaching out to them, well, you already save them the cost of finding you because you
yeah,
found them, and B, you make a positive impression and they're thinking, okay, I could work with this kid, and bang, you've
yeah.
kind of eliminated the second risk. And so you do that enough times, if MBF healthcare didn't work out, like, would you have been able to find a different one
Well,
with
so
after you talked to 80 people?
I, I, I'll, I don't mean to sound conceited, but I found two of them.
Yeah, no,
It
I
was,
bet you did.
it,
I bet you
it
did.
was, it was Copley and MBF, and
Oh wow, okay.
yeah. So there was, I guess the story goes as right. So I did. Let me actually go back one layer because I forgot this point, and it's kind of sneaky but super important. And I think a lot of sophomores who are going through this would love to know this, so I'll say it. But if you there's two things on Sales Navigator. I think it's the best tool for recruiting. I think everyone should get it. You can get the first month free and you can get all your contacts, make your list, and then not actually pay for it. Yeah,
Very
I,
nice.
I know I know LinkedIn's not going to like to hear
Take
that one,
advantage of
but
your resources. Yeah.
but as a college kid who didn't exactly have a plethora of income, I was trying to be sneaky. And so there's that. The other thing is you can see past employees of all these firms. So you can see if they've taken an intern or not before. And so by the law of
Mm,
numbers, you start with the firms that have taken interns before, right? And the way you kind of phrase the conversation in the last 5 to 10 minutes is, "Hey, I was just goofing around on LinkedIn. I saw you guys actually took an intern last summer. I was thinking about a private equity internship this summer. I didn't know if that was something that you guys would be interested in." And just make it super casual. Just, "Hey, I saw this online," right? So anyway, that was like
yeah.
the playbook, but. all that to say, I was fortunate. There was a senior associate out at Copley Equity who went to Miami of Ohio and had a great connection with him. They actually have a really good, really nice formal summer analyst program um, for for college students who ultimately they hire. They have a formal private equity analyst program. So um, that one was a little bit more streamlined in the sense of, there's other interns with me. It was a very, kind of structured thing. The fantastic firm. And then the MBF healthcare one was a little less structured. They'll take an intern here or there, but I, hit it off with a managing director down there who was a Miami of Ohio alum. And when I kind of go back to my conversation or my commentary around doing case competitions, because the way that
Yeah.
this worked was his name's Josh. He said, hey, like, I've enjoyed our conversations. I'd love to take on an intern, but just to get firm level buy-in, like, do you have any material? Like, do you have any work product you can show me? And I know he didn't do it. I know he didn't do it with any ill intention. He just wanted to make sure, like, if I'm gonna take you on and kind of bear the,
Yeah.
he
He's
put
looking
his,
for you. He's looking for you to give him some ammo so that he can go
yeah.
use it on your behalf. Like,
Like
yeah.
he's the one vouching for, a college sophomore, junior to, come spend time at, a private equity firm. Like
Yeah.
there's serious, business being conducted. Like I get where he came from, but I had sent along, a model and a PowerPoint deck that we did. It was basically kind of like an investment banking pitch. We
That
had
you did for a case
this
competition.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
it all comes full circle because William Blair actually did a case competition with Miami of Ohio, where ultimately when I got to Blair, I'd then go back to Miami and judge this case competition. So
Nice.
it was really full circle. But I sent him it, and he was like, "This is great. Let's get you started up." So I spent like a winter and spring with them as well, which I did
Nice.
during school. So it was a little bit
Well,
of a busier part-time one, but
well,
it was good.
that's really interesting because like we've definitely heard the advice of doing case competitions as a way to get reps, get practice building a model, get practice talking to bankers and people in finance and kind of put yourself out there. But what I haven't heard it as much, or I don't think it's come up at least on this program, using it basically as building a portfolio,
Yeah,
right? And almost like you're an artist, right? You're putting together these collections of work that you've done. So when someone says, "Hey, yeah, you say you can do all this, prove it,"
yeah,
and you can say, "Okay, here it is. Here's a model and a deck that I did for this case competition. I was on a team of, I don't need by yourself, or even if you're on a team of 3 people, there's
yeah,
still something that you can speak to. I own the model and I own this part, and here's what we did." And now you're giving them, like I said, ammunition to go in the fight, to go fight for you in the other circles that they have to influence other
yeah.
people. But I love that. So it's not just case competitions to sharpen your skills and put yourself out there, but it's also as a record of the work that you've done that you can then use to legitimize yourself in future conversations.
And I think it, no, very infrequently. I shouldn't say never, but very infrequently will like a junior summer internship like ask something of that to you. They have a formal process. They
Yeah.
have, their own 4 to 6 interviews, style, super day, and then maybe there's a small case study. Like it's not really going to bode as much for you there, but where I think it helps more than people realize is like getting a rep or two of that in as a freshman or very early in your sophomore year, because I always think of sophomore summer as a black box, right? Like you're there's not really too many formal application processes, right? The ones that they do have are for probably super large corporations, and I always get weary about sending my application into like a portal. It's like I want to email my application
Honestly,
if
don't
that
waste
makes
your
sense.
time. Yeah, don't.
Exactly, right? I'm not saying that it never works out. I'm just saying that I've seen the probability of it,
I
and I
heard that
like,
I've all the people I talked to, I heard it happening one time.
yeah,
Someone didn't network with a bank and they got an interview from just submitting on the portal. So it has happened, but
you never say never,
it
right?
is not. I would say hope is not a method. Is what I would also say.
I'm not a betting man, so I thought, I'd try and take the reins a little bit more, and with that, right, I think this goes back to the point around you don't really have that much to show an employer as a sophomore, and I don't mean that a mean way. It's just the reality is
No,
like
just
if you don't have
facts.
another internship and you don't really have any extracurricular uh, you can have extracurriculars, I guess, but if there's not much tangible,
Well,
evidence
that's
to show from
technical
just
and
being
professionally oriented. Yeah.
exactly like just being in a club, unfortunately, is not gonna they're just not gonna take your word that you did a great work for this club, right? So, I think the easiest way is as you're calling on these people. If I thought for me, like the most logical thing was, all right, well, go spend a summer in private equity because ultimately, if you want the optionality to go recruit for private equity after investment banking, and they ask you why do you want to do private equity, well, you can say I've done private equity.
Yeah.
So
I had some
it would,
exposure. I really liked it. A, B, and C. It builds your story.
yeah. I mean, it's private equity with a little bit of an asterisk because you were an intern as your sophomore summer in college, but the
Yeah.
the point is greater than if you never did it. Let me put it to you
Oh
that way,
yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Um, so yeah,
The training
that
wheels are
was
on, but you still rode the bike.
exactly. I didn't say I did, insane LBO models all day at my private equity internship.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I worked at a private equity firm as a sophomore,
Yeah.
right?
Don't say I grew a portfolio company 30%,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, they definitely kept me on more of the, kind of qualitative sourcing, thesis development stuff. But as I, now work in an investing role, like it only was helpful. Like sourcing is a part of any,
Yeah.
investment firm's core, work. So I thought getting the reps early on was
So say
helpful.
you're probably training the sourcing team on Sales Navigator over there.
I do have a good couple tools up my sleeve for sourcing that I've known about for some time now. Yeah.
Nice. Um, so I did want to ask a follow-up question on some of the case studies. You had mentioned like there, what would you say is a specific case study? Like tell us a story. Like which case study do you think was most impactful or really, or really challenged you in a way that you hadn't been challenged before?
Yeah. I'll probably the one that
Or case
I mean,
competition, not case study. Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a good one. So I'd probably stick on the William Blair case comp just because I did it a couple times, and admittedly, it's ultimately where I went and spent my 2 years of investment banking. So you can tell why it means a lot to me.
Yeah.
But that case competition essentially was think of a traditional bake off or pitch for an investment bank for a traditional sell side mandate, and so they model it after a deal that William Blair has actually done, but they blind the name so all the kids don't figure out what it is and ultimately learn the company, and so they try to anonymize it a little bit, but
Hmm.
they'll give you a short pack almost as if like a private equity firm had put together a 5 or 10 page overview deck on a portco they own and shipped it around to 3 or 4
Shopped
banks
it
to
around.
then
Yep.
yeah, to then, ultimately put together a traditional pitch and give their thoughts on, it was everything. I mean, it was what team is going to lead, the deal, what's timeline going to look like, what kind of process are you going to run? Is it going to be super narrow? Is it going to be big, right? Like who are the logical buyers? Is there a large strategic universe of, publicly traded comps out there that would want this business? Is it, primarily going to be more sponsor dependent or sponsor favorable? Ultimately your views on value, right? Transaction comps, public comps, DCF, LBO. And it probably accumulated to be about a 30 or 35 page deck with a supporting, operating model and LBO, DCF, as well as, comps that you would ultimately drop into the deck. So, I mean, I kind of viewed that. I did that my sophomore and junior year. Um, and I think I always had an interest in the Chicago investment banking scene. Going to school at Miami of Ohio, there was a very natural pull to Chicago, um, and I think person, excuse me, I think personality wise and just cultural fit, I tended to stray towards like the middle market world more so than um, maybe than like the New York elite boutique or bulge bracket scene, albeit being from Connecticut, that probably is a little bit of a backwards comment, but um, I don't know. I really liked the Midwest when I got out here, and all my friends were kind of from Chicago or were going to Chicago, and it was just a pretty natural next step. So getting the chance to both interface with folks who worked at William Blair and would come back to Miami and judge and host this case competition, as well as also understand what their process kind of looked like. I mean, they gave you instructions that would basically resemble how the Blair bankers would go about it.
Hmm.
Was a super helpful is a super helpful rep. And admit back to the part on taking my sophomore summer internship. That sophomore summer, or I guess I did that really early in sophomore year, like October of sophomore year,
Yeah,
because then I sent that second semester as a form to get the gig at MBF. So yeah,
nice. And what
yeah.
was like a critical point in that case competition, the Blair competition, where like you knew you had succeeded in some way? Like, what was the moment where maybe you got feedback or you saw how something came together and you're like, "Oh, we just crushed it." Like what how did you know you did well?
Yeah, I think this is like really specific, but I remember this vividly. I now know this now. I now understand and appreciate this more so than I did when I was uh 20 years old as a sophomore doing this competition. But after spending 4 internships and 3 years in finance, private equity, investment banking, like I didn't realize how common it was for there to be information traded between different counterparties that isn't exactly public, right? And what I mean is, oh, what this company trade for, what did what's what did that bank pitch that at, kind of thing, right? I
Yep.
think those things happen here and there, right? And so I remember being on PitchBook, and I'm like, I can't like find any of these transaction comps. Like none of them exist. None of this data is out here. Like how do these guys get all these comps?
The bane of the
And
existence of every analyst right there.
yeah,
And yeah.
like like where are you getting all this from? And we had ultimately like cobbled together like five or six, and I was like so proud that we had even gotten this far. And I even forget, it was like I went into like some BAMSEC reports. I was like deep on like random websites trying to find any data I could and piece anything together. But I remember like during the actual case competition, like one of the judges was like, talk me through like your methodology on comps and stuff. And I ultimately like kind of there was methodology, but also just like the data accumulation was, in my opinion, like the hardest part. And so
Yeah.
I kind of view that as just obviously like understanding what goes into that valuation method was important, but more just like kind of getting creative around sourcing information is another
Yeah.
thing that I took from it, that I was
It,
relatively
it so
pro.
I can infer then that it was clear to the judges and potentially to you at the time that you guys had gone farther in terms of like digging and scraping for every little fleck of data that you could put together to like back into some other number and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It was like playing Jenga
Yeah.
with the Excel table.
Like I got revenue over here and I got,
Yeah. Yeah, like, oh
head
well,
count.
like
Let's
they have this amount of employees, and like if I multiply that, like they've got this many facilities, like maybe we can extrapolate this and this. Like is there like any
Mhm.
correlation? Yeah. So
Yeah. No, that's
um
great because that's what you got to do. I mean, on the job. I mean, that's real.
yeah.
I mean, there are multiples where you just go ask the MD and
Yeah.
he's like, "Oh yeah, everyone knows it's traded for 10 and a half times." And
Yeah.
everybody knows, "Oh, okay, got it. Now I
Yeah.
know." But it wasn't
It,
anywhere. So, but
exactly.
most of the
Exactly.
time you
It's in
don't have
someone's
that.
email.
Yeah, no, it's in an email. But there is a lot of, I mean, it's private company information what we're talking about here. So this is not like this is not material non-public information. This is private
No,
company information. They have no requirement to report anything to anybody. Um,
exactly.
and so that's why it can be pretty difficult. And there's also
Yeah,
an incentive a lot of time not to share the information for different reasons. So
exactly.
um,
Because yeah,
no,
100%.
awesome. Well, I appreciate you going into that. Like again, like you just can't underscore how key those case competitions are because they challenge you to build new skills and demonstrate those new skills. And you're gonna screw stuff up and things aren't gonna go well. But fail on the case competition in front of everybody, then you won't
Yeah.
fail in the interview and the super
Yeah.
day in front of everybody. So
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Um, say a little bit more. Say a little bit about your time at William Blair. So you graduated in 22 from Miami of Ohio. You jumped into the investment banking analyst role in Chicago at William Blair in the industrial growth products team. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. What kind of deals were you working on? What are some of the things that
Yeah.
you remember in terms of the your how you were challenged in your growth and development during that time?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I spent 2 years at William Blair Industrial Growth Products. I spent probably 75% of my time on paper packaging and plastics transactions. Um, and then I spent some other time around kind of safety and security, I'd call it, and then some more time around kind of test and measurement. The
Okay,
group, the way broadly to think about that group is it's traditional capital goods manufacturing industrials. But I'd like to think that most of the, kind of deals that they're doing tend to be on the growthier side of the spectrum, or a little bit higher multiple than, your traditional, maybe six, seven, eight times, kind of sleepy manufacturing businesses. Some of these are trying to play on more of the macro trends. So, when I first got there, one of the businesses that I sold was a flexible packaging business, and flexible packaging, for example, played on the trend of kind of sustainability, and so right, use less water, less kind of energy to make the packaging. The packaging itself is more recyclable, so things like that that you might achieve a little bit of a higher multiple for, relative to kind of the traditional industrials ecosystem. So I was fortunate. I think I all in did 4 or 5 deals there over the course of my 2 years. Obviously,
great.
there's a lot more that happened than just those deals. There's pitches, traditional kind of coverage work, meeting decks for different company meetings and private equity sponsor meetings. But I had a really awesome team. That were both extremely, supportive of me during my time there. But then, when I ultimately wanted to make the move over to the buy side, where my biggest cheerleaders come time to, you know, do reference checks and
Right.
kind of look for what's next. So, um, but no, I mean the time there was great. I really liked the space that I worked on. I think the deals that I worked on were primarily between 20 and 75 of EBITDA. So I'd call it traditional middle market. The cool part that I really liked, and this was a reason why I ultimately chose the firm I'm at now, and spent some time at these firms when I was in college as well. But both firms that I mentioned that I worked at in college were family offices. And Pritzker Private Capital, where I'm at now, started as a family office and still has familial roots in its investing style. And so the cool part about some of the deals I worked on at Blair, where they were family founder owned businesses, and I think I made the comment earlier around I really enjoyed the Chicago kind of middle market scene more so than maybe the New York bulge bracket or elite boutique scene is doing a lot of these deals primarily in the Midwest, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, and kind of being on site with business owners, while they're thinking about a really important transaction, or honestly maybe perhaps one of the biggest transactions or events of their lives to date. It was really cool being a part of that, and I got to work on I think 2 of the 5 I did at Blair were family or founder owned, and they're obviously I think when they haven't worked with an investment banking advisor before and they
Yeah.
see the value and the help that you can provide, they're like super appreciative of it. And I thought that kind of interpersonal dynamic that I got in some of my deals is really fun, and it was fun to work with, right? Obviously working with other private equity firms is great as well, but when a business has been private equity owned 3 times, that management team's pretty well oiled. They know what to expect. Whereas, a family owned company who's going
Yeah.
through it for the first time is like really, even at the junior level, cutting up data is, kind of relying on you for sound guidance and helping them, kind of figure all of it out.
Yeah, that's a great
So
point. I think it's a nuanced point that a lot of folks miss, especially if you're not in the middle market. You kind of really don't see much of it at all. But the recognition that if this is a family-owned business, I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime transaction that they're going through. They're not doing this, or maybe two or three times in a life, right? But it's not something that they're doing day in and day out, like the PE folks or the PE management teams, like you said, who are well-oiled. They know what to say, when to say it.
yeah,
And it is
yeah.
really something that you can bring to the table as a banker and take a lot of pressure off of them and help them see around those corners. And that's really cool. It does feel good to help those types of clients really get better outcomes for themselves and their family. And you do make a material impact. I saw something similar at Baird, so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can empathize.
exactly. I think that's one of the the gems of working, especially in Chicago, the Midwest, at a kind of mid market firm.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And so you kind of look at your career arc. So you kind of did the traditional couple years in banking, make the pivot over to private equity or at Pritzker Private Capital. How did you land on Pritzker Private Capital? What jumped out at you about that organization and that particular opportunity? And I guess what were some of the how did you approach your career search strategy um, when you were a banking analyst looking for that private equity opportunity?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it was probably relatively similar to, my criteria that I had for investment banking. I had every intention of spending, more time in Chicago. I, liked kind of the middle market scene. I'd spent time in packaging and, kind of broader industrials during my time at William Blair. And Pritzker obviously does, a lot on, we have a one side of our house is called the manufactured products, segment. And, we own businesses in packaging, chemicals, specialty materials, food. Um, and so it was a pretty natural marriage just between what I had, previously been exposed to in banking and in some of these other, internships that I had worked. As I mentioned, both my time at Copley and MBF was, was at a family office. And, I liked that, there was the Pritzker element to Pritzker Private Capital, right? In terms of just the family involvement. I like that kind of interpersonal touch on the investing, side of it. And then, I think there was, a nice relationship both between, kind of my team at Blair and, Blair holistically, and then, Pritzker as an organization, such that when, I was kind of talking to folks about where it might make sense to go next, that was one of the names that had kind of come up as, a firm that, I would be a, pretty nice cultural fit just in terms of, Blair's, a really good place to work, and, Pritzker is as well. Obviously, I think sometimes in the finance industry, you can get caught up with, maybe some not so pleasant folks. And I don't think we have that much of an issue of that here in Chicago, but we definitely don't have it at any of the firms that I've worked at. And, the cultural fit's obviously super important. You spend a bunch of time with these folks. And
Yeah.
I think, it was kind of a mix of, location and size that I wanted. The industries that I wanted, those were all kind of check the box, right? Like those were table stakes. And then I think ultimately, what kind of one, it was just the cultural fit, right? Between myself and all the folks who I had interfaced with
Yeah.
around the interview time.
And what type of projects have you gotten on? Because you just joined. Looks like you joined a little right about a year ago. So congrats on 1 year at Pritzker. What types of projects have you been working on?
Yeah, so I spend most of my time on the manufactured product side of the house. Traditionally, associates will get a platform or two that we've owned for some time, portfolio company, and they will assist the management team in whether it's add-on M&A or it's some kind of strategic project or initiative. There's also kind of internal reporting. Um, quarterly reporting exercises that we go through to update investors. So there's kind of some of the more internal side of it. Um, and then on the other side, there's a little bit of kind of sourcing, business development, thesis generation kind of work that I'd mentioned before. I'd done some of that some time ago, so it's
Yeah.
nice to put those skills to use again. That probably takes up 10 or 20% of your time. I think you're definitely expected to be helpful with it, but ultimately, the VPs tend to do a little bit more there in terms of sourcing and trying to find the next great business that we'll partner with. So that's that side of it, and then the last thing is looking at new opportunities, new platforms, that we'd ultimately try to partner with. So
Well, no, this is great. I mean, I think it's great to give a little bit of a flavor for what you're doing on a day to day, and how does Pritzker help bring on those new associates and get them involved with the team.
yeah,
Um, what would you say, kind of, I think, there's a lot of students out there who are rising sophomores, maybe even rising freshmen, rising juniors, who are all trying to follow this path. So, I guess what sort of parting thoughts would you give, to that student who's sitting there listening to this, maybe heading into their sophomore year, looking down the barrel of a whole gauntlet of
yeah,
interviews and networking and technical prep and everything. Like, what would you say to that student?
yeah. Um, Gosh, there's a lot of
Too
thoughts,
much.
but I mean, I think, as I look back on this, I think it's taken in pieces, right? I think there's so much that you feel like you should be doing, and especially, depending on what school you're at or how many of your peers or classmates are trying to do a similar thing, it's really easy to get caught up in like, oh, well, this person's ahead of me or this person's behind me. Like, I get like people who pursue a career in this industry tend to be a little bit more competitive. And I think there's a level of healthy competitiveness you can have with your peers, but when I say take it in steps, like just worry about your progress and doing things in the right chronological order to ultimately set you up for the good sophomore and junior summer internships. And what I mean by that is,
Yeah.
like, if someone is already calling people, but you haven't done a case competition or you haven't done a financial modeling course like Adventus, or you haven't put together a resume, like, that one might be a little bit more table stakes, but like, take your timeline and really like mend it to what makes sense for you, and like kind of keep your blinders on to an extent. I think a lot of people maybe get around to the start of sophomore year and they're like, oh, I have to start networking because that's what like Wall Street Oasis says I have to do, or that's what I have to do.
Right.
But like, you really maybe haven't done the right amount of research, or you haven't educated yourself properly on how those calls go and what things you should know before even getting on those calls to ask intelligent questions and have those conversations actually be fruitful for your recruiting process. So all that to be said, I think the way I would sequence it perhaps is, if you're second semester freshman year, first semester sophomore year, obviously as many finance courses that you can take. Even, some schools are really hard and fast on you don't take any of your, major courses until sophomore year. Like, if there's any waiver around maybe taking the most entry level finance course as a second semester freshman, or taking a course that you may take as a second semester sophomore as a first semester sophomore. Like, a lot of kids, for example, in Miami of Ohio, who wanted to do banking would front run the M&A course. They'd try and reach out to the professor and explain their situation and be like, hey, I really want to take the M&A course. I think it'll be helpful to me. So like, if there's any kind of flexibility around the courses, like, I think that's step one. Past that, it's you should probably get involved in an organization, like, if your school's got the finance association or the investment banking, club, or some form or some club that has relevant form to what you're ultimately trying to do. That should be step two. And then I think beyond that, it's adding on this the kind of smaller things like a case competition, or financial modeling course like Adventus. And then ultimately, once you've kind of got the base and you've built yourself, then you should start doing the networking, right? That's kind of how I think about it. When you get on these calls and you network, you want to have things to talk about. You want to have a resume that you're proud of, that people will pass along to HR, pass along into the portal. And I think if you just kind of start making these calls and jump the gun just because other people are doing it, like, it may not be as useful as you think it's going to be. So take it in strides, sequence things appropriately, give yourself enough time to do things. It's not going to happen overnight. And when in doubt, just pound the phone, take hundreds
No.
of calls.
Yep. Yep. There's no
Yeah,
substitute for getting reps and that exposure. But to your point, it's like build the foundation, build the technicals, get the academic coursework, front load that, get the case competition experience, get a freshman year, or get an internship after freshman year, and then all of that builds towards this, you know, top-notch networking campaign to actually get in front of the decision makers
exactly.
before you interview. So cool. Well, thanks,
Exactly.
Demetre. Yeah, man, this has been great. I really appreciate you sharing those insights. So many great insights talking through your time at Miami of Ohio. Such a great program. I've heard so many great things about it, and yeah, I mean, you've done it the right way, and hey, you're just getting started too. So I'm
Yeah.
sure you got a long, illustrious career ahead of you. If I could ask that before we drop, like, where do you see yourself in kind of that 4 to 5 year range? I know like things move really fast, and it's impossible to figure like the world's gonna be
Yeah.
completely different in 5 years. But like, what would you say right now if I asked you that, which I did? So
Yeah, yeah, no, I think I've really enjoyed the investing and kind of the operating work that goes alongside investing. And I really like spending time with our our family companies and being kind of in the alternative investment private equity ecosystem. I've enjoyed it. So I see myself sticking around in that world for the foreseeable future. There may be a stop to business school in between career stints, but yeah, I've really enjoyed the investing world and have every intention of sticking around in it.
awesome, love it.
Yeah.
All right, well, hey, appreciate your time. Great to
Yeah.
connect.
Likewise. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, and best of luck.